connected to Marianne?
Marianne.
Marianne.
Hi.
Hi.
What?
It's so nice to meet you, sir.
Nice meeting you.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, I'll get right into my questions.
Sure.
The 3D release of The Lion King, 2 weeks in a row, it was #1.
Yeah.
And it's 17 years later. I'm sure you're obviously very happy. Does it surprise you how popular the movie still is?
Well, if I were honest, I would say yes. I think you certainly hope when you make a movie that it'll be popular to the audience when you first release it, and if you're really lucky, people appreciate it, a few years later when it comes out on DVD or Blu-ray. And if you're really, really lucky, it gets made into a stage show. And so, in a funny way, I feel like I've won the lottery, because now to have the movie come out again 17 years later and have the audience embrace it the way they have is really, it's thrilling, it's exciting, it's a tribute to the artists that worked on it, it's humbling, it's all those things.
That's great. I mean, you beat a Brad Pitt film.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's awesome, and I actually saw that movie. It's a good movie. I mean, it really is,
Yeah.
but it's wonderful that people can come back and enjoy a film like Lion King.
I remember seeing The Lion King. It was a benchmark for my childhood. I think I was 11 or 12.
Uh-huh.
And now a whole new generation of kids are able to can experience it on the big screen. I just think that's great.
Yeah, it is. It's part of the fun of it, because you can go to the theater and enjoy it yourself if you did see it as a kid. But which a large part of the audience is, but it's also taking kids who haven't seen it. It's a little like having been to Disneyland and you enjoyed it when you were growing up. Now it's really fun to take little kids and see it through their eyes, and it seems like that's what people are doing, and it's incredibly flattering.
Okay, I want to talk about some of the themes of The Lion King. There's family, responsibility, redemption. What kind of themes do you see in the film?
Well, it's very much an underdog story. It's very much about a character who has to stand up for himself. Certainly that idea of redemption, that we all have a second chance. And Christopher was framed for this terrible murder, so on one hand you can say it wasn't his fault, but he wasn't a stand-up guy. So a little bit of the theme of the movie is you have to stand up for yourself if you know you're right, and so that idea of redemption, that idea of that day in your life when you grow up and have to take responsibility for yourself. You're no longer a child, you're an adult now. All those themes resonated with us when we were making the movie, and thankfully the audience appreciated them as well.
Great. I also think there's sort of this sense of spirituality in the film. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely, and it's something that I'm not sure we consciously approached. Although, since we wanted it to not just be a National Geographic documentary, we wanted to take advantage of animation, and animation can tell very human stories in this allegorical way that not everybody can. So there definitely is a spiritual sense, whether it's the connection of Simba to his father after he's lost his father, whether it's the idea of our ancestors and kings of the past have invested so much in us that it's our job to kind of celebrate that and be the best we can be. All those themes are very much alive in Lion King.
Do you have a favorite scene or section of the movie?
Well, I think for sheer impact, the Circle of Life at the beginning of the movie is pretty cool, and really establishes the movie in a big way. And I really like the scene where Mufasa's ghost comes back to Simba. It's a wonderful, ethereal moment in the film, and something very unusual when you think about a film set in Africa with real animals and no humans, and no real sense of what time it was set in. To have this Hamlet's ghost sequence in the middle of the movie, I think it ended up being one of the high points of the movie, I think, for the audience, and certainly a very emotional part of the movie.
That's my favorite scene. Great. What about in the 3D release? Some of the things you changed. Is there another sort of scene that you like?
Well, probably the hardest one was the wildebeest stampede, because we had thousands of computer-generated wildebeest running all over the place, and the screen filled with dust. And I think our stereographer and his team, Robert Newman, we were able to turn that into a really great 3D scene, and get the feeling like you almost have to duck when that scene comes on the film, because it's running over the top of you in the theater. So, here's the technique, I'm going to go look at it. You come to be entertained and transported, and I think scenes like that, certainly contribute to that feeling in 3D.
Awesome. Can you talk about some of the special features that are on the Blu-ray release of the movie?
Well, yeah, I think we have one of the best documentaries we've ever been able to put together, not only on the film, but also what the Lion King has come to mean on stage and in all these other iterations that it's had. So there's a great documentary, and then we did something really unusual. For the first time, we thought, well, why don't we have bloopers and outtakes on
funny.
DVD? So we went out and we didn't record anything new. We thought, let's go back to the original recordings from 1992, 1993, and we had our poor editor go through hours and hours and hours of recording sessions and pull out the funniest James Earl Jones and the funniest, Boom and Timon lines and Jeremy Irons lines and string them all up. And then I called back to the animators, the original animators that animated on the movie, and every one of them came back and animated their own characters. So now you have these original funny outtakes and flubs and kind of silly lines from the movie that I think people will really love.
That's so neat. I love that.
Yeah, it's really.
Now, you as a producer, how involved are you with all the different filmmaking aspects, working with directors or writers? And does it vary from the project to project?
It does. It varies from project to project. I think in animation you're far more involved and more of a creative partner to the directors. I'm not a cigar chomping finance kind of guy. My background's music and art, and what I love to do is work with great creative artists and help them make their movie. So to me, the best time in the world is when you can sit down with great directors like Rob and Roger, great designers, and make sure that everybody's making the same movie, make sure they have a great environment to make the movie, and also be able to contribute. Be able to contribute from my musical background or from my interest in film and art, and to be able to feel like you're a partner and all that is thrilling.
That's cool. So recently you've produced a lot of documentaries. Mm-hmm. What's the transition like from working with animated films to doing those?
Well, they're faster. The animated films take 4 years, 5 years.
Right.
You can pull a documentary together, some in a year's time, although a film like African Cats that's coming out next week is on Blu-ray also, took about 3 years to film out of the Masai Mara, which is the same place we went scouting for Lion King, 17, 18 years ago. So even though a nature movie like African Cats or Chimpanzee that's coming up that we're working on right now, they come together quickly in the editing room. We have guys out in the field for 2 and 3 years on those, filming and hoping something happens and pointing their camera at animals and trying to capture the real drama of it all. So in a sense, they're saying the same because you're trying to tell a story. In animation, you control every frame. You have control over every piece of the film. And in nature, you're crossing your fingers and pointing the camera and hoping something happens.
Right. What draws you to specific films, and what makes you want to produce specific movies?
Oh, I suppose it's the easy answer is story, but I think it goes beyond that. I enjoy trying to find films that have an interesting angle on life, that have a theme to them, that is not just a story about a character that goes from A to B to C, but a story that may underline some theme in our lives, or may not teach, but just remind us sometimes of, like in Lion King's case, about the relationship we have with our fathers and how important that is. And so I love movies that have that character dimension to them also. And a lot of it's a stab in the dark. I mean, there's no guarantee when you start on an idea, you say, wow, everybody's going to want to see a film about a lion cub that gets framed for murder. Nobody wants to see that, but you wrestle it to the ground and you get the best artist you can and you work hard on it to turn that into a story, and the challenge is probably the other main reason I love to do it.
Now, I really loved Waking Sleeping Beauty. How was it directing a film as opposed to producing it?
Well, I loved it. It's very seductive because you have that one in particular. I had a lot of opinions about how that movie needed to come together, and I had lived it, and it was something where I felt like all the players in Waking Sleeping Beauty would talk to me, that I could get some very disparate personalities like Roy Disney or Jeffrey Katzenberg or the artist to talk, and I was really fortunate that they did because I feel like their story is very inspirational and very uplifting.
Yes.
And I love the story behind the story, to be able to look at Lion King and understand that it was done in a very tumultuous time, or understand that 6 months before the movie came out, there was a massive earthquake in Southern California, and we ended up having to make our movie on kitchen tables and in garages because the studio had to close down. So, those kinds of human dramas played out against making an animated film are always really interesting, and so I love doing Waking Sleeping Beauty for that reason. And there's actually a documentary on the disc that's very much cut out of the same cloth as Waking Sleeping Beauty. I did a memoir film of kind of a scrapbook of my images and home movies of making the film, and it's very much about the life and times of the people that made this movie.
I rewatched it the other day, and I just loved it. I just thought it was so good.
It's an amazing story.
Yes.
I mean, I just felt like it had to be told, and I had lived through it, but the more years that went by, the more it was clear that people needed to know this story, because it is I think a story, not to be self-aggrandizing, but it's a story of people struggling over difficult odds to try to create something. And isn't that what creativity is about? When you write or paint or cook or whatever you do, you have to push, and you have to push against those odds to create something. And so I think the story of Waking Sleeping Beauty is ultimately inspiring.
I completely agree. Now, are there plans to re-release any more of the films in 3D like you did with Beauty and the Beast and Lion King?
We don't have any. Certainly we've talked about it, and certainly I think every studio in Hollywood has, in the last 2 weeks, looked at their library and thought, wow, this might be something. Certainly it's something that might happen. There's no specific ideas that we have right now.
What about Roger Rabbit? I know you were an associate producer on that.
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Again, no plans.
Right.
But, movies like that, or, sometimes I even think, and we haven't talked about this, but a movie like Peter Pan, where you have people flying over the rooftops of London and kids in pajamas fighting pirates. What a wonderful experience that would be in 3D. So, no big choices, no big discussions, really. It's just really about trying to see what might entertain the audience.
And Marianne, we've got time for one more question.
Okay, I had one more question. What are your projects you have coming up?
Well, I'm working on two of them right now. Chimpanzee, which has been shooting for about 3 years in the Ivory Coast and Uganda. Same directors that did the Planet Earth series. Brilliant guys,
wonderful.
Alistair Fothergill and Mark Linfield. And that's a film that comes out on Earth Day next year. And then for the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've been working with Tim Burton on an animated film called Frankenweenie. It's a stop-motion version of a short that he did back in the early 80s here at Disney. And it's a wonderful labor of love for Tim and for all of us. It's a great, great story. Funny, emotional, and done with puppets like Nightmare Before Christmas. And that comes out in October, a year from next week.
Oh, wonderful. And I love stop-motion animation. I think that's so neat.
It is, because you can see the hands. You can feel that it's a puppet, that it's a little Barbie doll that you're moving around one frame at a time. And there's actually a big resurgence of interest in stop motion, at the university level and professionally. There's a lot of stop motion movies happening right now.
Well, that's all my questions. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Well, thanks, Marianne. It's my pleasure.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Don, if you can stay on the phone with me, I will get you to your next call. Thanks so much, Marianne.
Oh, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And Don, your next